Hey everybody, welcome back. Miss Calabrese here. So in this video, we're going to be talking about some other infections of the skin and eye, aside from those that are caused by bacteria. So we're talking about viral infections, protozoal, fungal, and helminthic. All right, so we'll start with some of these viral infections. So the first one, and the one you're probably the most familiar with here, is chickenpox. So chickenpox is a popular name for varicella. So varicella is a very, very common skin rash among children. Not so common nowadays because we've got a pretty powerful vaccine. But it used to be fairly common, and pretty much every child would get the chickenpox at some point during childhood. Usually, this is a pretty mild disease where we get these lesions on the skin that are incredibly itchy, and then they begin to heal as they kind of break open and then crust over. Um, Varicella is not too problematic among most children, but it can be dangerous in newborns. All right, so the varicella, once your immune system recovers and eliminates the virus, it's not actually totally gone. So we've got the sequela, which is a condition that happens after. And for chickenpox, the sequela is shingles or herpes zoster. So this is a rash that appears could be decades after infection with the initial chickenpox, and it's because the virus has gone latent. It's gone into a dormant phase where it just basically is hiding out in one of your spinal nerves. And eventually, when your immune system is weakened by either age or stress or some other cause, then it will go out of dormancy and cause shingles, which is a very painful rash because it originates in a nerve. Okay. So as far as the pathogenesis here, so chickenpox enters through the respiratory route, so you inhale droplets with the virus, and they move from the respiratory system through the bloodstream to the skin, right? So that's how they arrive on the skin and then begin to cause those lesions. It causes these cells to swell and lyse and fuse together. So these kind of large cells then burst, and that's what causes those pustules on the surface. As far as epidemiology, usually we see a little bit more of this in the winter and the springtime. Incubation period is about 2 weeks. So between the time where you catch it and the time where you start to notice symptoms. Um, and then as far as prevention and treatment, now we've got a vaccine. So for the most part, children don't have to suffer with this anymore. They get vaccinated against it, and that's going to prevent the actual disease um, uh, uh, from from occurring. All right, so moving on to our next viral disease of childhood, here's measles. So measles is a common name for rubeola. Measles is probably the most infectious viral disease, so it's incredibly contagious. But we've managed to control the spread of measles through vaccines. So vaccines now prevent most cases of measles, although we do see cases popping up now and then in anti-vax communities. Symptoms look like basic kind of cold symptoms, so fever, runny nose, cough, and then we start to see the rash, so the actual skin symptoms that are associated with measles happens a few days later. So it usually starts on the forehead and then it spreads over the rest of the body, um, as you can see in this child here. All right, so the causative agent here is the rubeola virus. So he's a medium-sized enveloped virus, single-stranded RNA genome. The pathogenesis here is again respiratory, so droplet spread of the virus. He's going to start his infection again in the epithelial tissues of the respiratory tract, and then he's going to move to the skin from there. You'll also see, in addition to the rash on the surface of the skin, you can see the infection in the mucous membranes of the respiratory tract. So especially like in this picture, we can see on the tongue, we've got these spots on the surface of the tongue that are somewhat helpful in diagnosing a case of the measles. Right. Humans are the only host for the measles, so we don't see any other animals that carry this particular disease. But because it is so highly infectious, is somewhat difficult to control. Although widespread use of vaccines create herd immunity that reduces the spread. Okay. And as far as other treatments, there really aren't any. So there's no treatment for measles once you actually have it. The best treatment is just prevention. And we all get vaccinated with our MMR, which is our measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, which is going to prevent infection with the measles. All right. So measles or this rubeola is just the first of a lot of common viral rashes of childhood. So we mentioned the rubeola, then the other ones here, scarlet fever, rubella, Duke's disease, fifth disease, and roseola. So these are all just very common rashes of childhood that before we knew what was causing them back in the early 1900s, we just numbered them, right? So that's why some of these are still even just known by their numbers. For example, fifth disease. All right, so here's fifth disease. So this is one that can occur in adults as well, although mostly we see it in children. Starts with general kind of flu-like symptoms, so fever, malaise, headaches, muscle aches, and then you start to see the cheeks getting this rash. So we start to get this rash developing on the cheeks. Sometimes you'll hear this one referred to as slapped cheek disease because the redness looks as though someone was just hit on the cheek. So the rash comes and goes, lasts about 2 weeks. In adults, this is much more painful. So in kids, they seem to handle it pretty well. In adults, it can cause some really painful joint symptoms. All right, so this is caused by a parvovirus, so parvovirus B19, which is a tiny little non-enveloped virus that can get involved in your bone marrow cells. All right, and then sixth disease or roseola. This one is again another common one for small children, 6 months to 3 years. It starts with again a high fever, and then we start to see this rash. So the rash is usually on the chest and on the belly. And the children a lot of times don't have other very strong symptoms aside from the rash. So this one's caused by a human herpes virus type 6. All right, and then moving on to um, another type of viral skin disease here, and this is warts. So warts are caused by papillomaviruses, and they usually enter the skin through some sort of tiny little cut, tiny little entry point of the virus can get in there, and then start to form these small growths, and those growths are the warts, and they're basically tumors. They're tiny little tumors that are caused by excess growth of those cells because of the way that the virus attacks the reproductive cycle of your cells. Right. So papillomaviruses are again very small, non-enveloped viruses. They can be transmitted on surfaces. So you can get you can spread warts through direct contact or through indirect contact via things like towels and shower floors and things like that. All right, so typically the papillomaviruses like to get into the deeper layers of the epidermis, and then they enter into the nucleus of the cell, and that's where they cause a lot of abnormal growth. So they get these epidermal cells to kind of overgrow, and that's where you start to see the wart. Usually treatment is just by killing all those abnormal cells, so stopping their growth, and that could be from freezing them off, burning them off, or removing them surgically. Okay, so now leaving the viral diseases and moving on to fungal diseases. So now we're moving on to fungi. So superficial cutaneous mycoses, that just means skin infection by fungi. And the skin is a nice breeding ground for fungus. So we do see a lot of fungal infections in the skin and the hair. They like the keratin, the protein that you find in skin and hair. These are caused by a handful of different types of fungus, but a lot of times you'll see them referred to by these names: Tinea capitis, Tinea axillaris, Tinea curis. So these refer to just fungal infections of different regions of the body. So tinea capitis is when you have mycosis of the scalp. Tinea axillaris is if it's under your arm. Tinea curis is for a jock itch, and tinea pedis would be athlete's foot. Right. So these are all just fungal diseases of different locations. And although the way that these are written here, tinea pedis, tinea curis, those sound like scientific names, like a binomial nomenclature. These are not actual scientific names of the critters that cause the disease. Right. So symptoms of these cutaneous mycoses are can be itching, kind of dryness. They could have a little bit of a smell to it and redness, just because of the overgrowth of the fungal cells. Right, so the causative agents usually belong to one of these three groups here. So these three genera of fungi usually cause most of these superficial cutaneous mycoses, and that's epidermophyton, microsporum, or trichophyton. So altogether, these are just usually commonly referred to as dermatophytes. Dermatophytes referring to the skin, the fungus that grows on the skin. Right. So normally your skin can be resistant to the dermatophytes, but anytime that the skin is extra damp, if there's extra moisture in the skin, so you're wearing wet shoes or wet socks or things like that, that's going to encourage the growth of fungi. So they like damp, dark areas. So any extra moisture is going to increase the possibility for a dermatophyte infection. All right. So as far as epidemiology here, this can happen to anyone, but age can be a factor here. So older age, you're just more likely to have dermatophyte infection. And as far as prevention, just cleanliness and dryness. So a good hygiene and keeping the skin, hair, and nails dry. All right, so other fungal infections. So here's Candida. So Candida is a yeast. All right, so now we're talking about yeast infections. And this is not a yeast that's uncommon, right? So Candida albicans is a yeast that you find normally in your normal flora. So this is part of your normal flora in your skin, part of the normal flora in your mouth and in the vaginal canal. But if the yeast gets out of balance with the bacteria that are part of the normal microbiome, that's when we start to see possible infections caused. So if we have an infection in the mouth from overgrowth of Candida, that's referred to as oral thrush. All right, and then looking at a protozoal infection of the skin. So these guys are not too common, right? So we don't have a lot of skin protozoa, but this one, Acanthamoeba, so he's an amoeba. He's usually just free living in the soil, so not a parasitic critter, but can become parasitic, or some species are parasitic. And when they are parasitic, then they can infect the eye and the skin and possibly into the nervous system. So here we can see a picture of what the cyst form of this acanthamoeba looks like, what the trophozoite form looks like, so that's the actively growing form. And then this picture C is an acanthamoeba infection of the cornea, so you can see it in the eyeball there. Um, and then this can become particularly dangerous if it does find its way into the nervous system. So it can cause this granulomatous acanthamoebic encephalitis. Okay. And then as far as helminth infections go, so again, not too many worm infections of the skin and eye, but we do see this one, Loa loa. So Loa loa is the scientific name of the worm, which is a nematode worm that can cause loiasis. So this is transmitted through the bite of a deer fly. So you can see the deer fly in the top picture here. So the deer fly bites, injects the eggs or the larval stages of this worm, and then the worm will grow into adulthood in the eyeball, and so that's what causes loiasis, which is a form of river blindness, can cause blindness. Okay, so just a quick question here. Which one of these guys is going to cause ringworm? So think about what ringworm is and what do you think causes it? All right, so your answer here is going to be tinea. So ringworm, even though it's got the name worm in it, is actually a fungal infection. So it's caused by tinnias. All right, so I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions.